Yo, welcome back everybody to a brand new video here on the second channel. It's that time we're going to look at the top 10 best cards within Temporal Forces. With Temporal Forces coming out in just a few weeks and with a brand new era of the TCG upon us, I'm excited for this new set, man. There's ace specs, new powerful EXs. The set is a game changer. A lot of game-changing new cards within the set. Actually, it was kind of hard to pick 10 cards. There's actually like at least 20 to 15 cards in the set. You could realistically call some of the best cards within the set. It's a pretty good set, not going to lie. It's pretty stacked. Of course, you can agree or disagree within the comments below. And of course, with pre-releases already started, I'm sure some of y'all have already gotten your hands on some of these brand new powerful cards. Let me know what you think of the ranking down below and all that good stuff. Without further ado, let's get into the top 10. And coming in at the number 10 spot, we have Emergency Board. Now, this card is a great new upgrade to the Lost Zone engine, and that's really why it made the top 10. It's literally just because it is one of the best cards that Lost Box does gain. Lost Box does lose some pretty big cards with rotation. It loses some of its main attackers like Dragonite V, Kyogre is another big one. Escape Rope is a pretty big loss. Battle VIP. However, the deck does gain a new Pivot Tool card, which is something that Lost Box did lose with the last rotation we had when Air Balloon rotated. But now we have our Emergency Board. The retreat cost of the Pokemon this card is attached to has a 1 colorless retreat cost, meaning that if you put this on your Comfey, it can retreat for free, meaning at the start of your turn with the Emergency Board on, you can promote Comfey, Flower Select, and then retreat to the bench, which is a really strong effect. This card is fantastic. There might be other decks this could see playing, but the main one, of course, is going to be that Lost Box deck. Lost Box is actually doing pretty good in Japan right now. In fact, some could consider the Lost Zone box decks with Roaring Moon and Iron Hands to be one of the best decks in Japan right now. Giratina V-Star is also still surviving in this new format, and Emergency Board is just such a great upgrade. If you're going to be playing a Lost Zone deck in the new format, you definitely got to play at least a couple Emergency Board in your deck. It is a fantastic card, and the fact that it makes Lost Box a lot stronger is a big reason why it cracks into the top 10. Of course, we got to talk about Cinccino, which had to make the top 10. This deck literally won the Champions League over in Japan. Now, to be fair, it is still kind of early to tell, and we haven't really had a chance to play Cinccino Lugia for ourselves. So we honestly don't know if this deck is actually going to be BDIF or it can be contender for a BDIF. It might be really good going into EUIC because of all the hype it got, but we'll have to see post EUIC how well this deck actually ages. But Cinccino definitely is looking like a very promising new card. It's just absolutely busted with Lugia. Being able to do special roll, doing 70 damage for each special energy on this Pokemon is ridiculous. Of course, if you put like 5 energy on this thing, it is one-shotting almost anything in its path, including Charizard EX, which is a big reason why Cinccino Lugia is such a dominant and powerful deck. That's because it has a great matchup against Charizard, which is usually a bad matchup for Lugia decks, but because now you have Cinccino, the matchup becomes a lot easier. Essentially, Cinccino reminds me of the new age of Single Strike Tyranitar. It's kind of the same thing. You just load up a big Pokemon with energy and just blow up anything in the active spot. And if your opponent doesn't go after that Pokemon and goes around it, well, you're just going to lose even more Pokemon with Cinccino. Again, we'll have to see how well this card ages after EUIC, because I'm sure Cinccino Lugia is going to be one of the most popular decks at EUIC, but post EUIC, we'll have to see if the Cinccino Lugia deck is actually going to be a BDIF status deck or not. But I definitely think Cinccino had to make the top 10. And again, it's a little too early to tell how good this card is, so I did put it more to the lower of the ranking, but I did want to include it in the top 10 regardless. Next up, at the number 8 spot is our first ace spec that has officially made the list, and that is going to be Hero's Cape. Now, this card is actually seeing a lot of play in Japan right now in a various amount of archetypes, mostly seeing a lot of play within some of the more stally archetypes, like Snorlax really likes this card, obviously a big card to play within the Great Tusk Mill deck, but this card is very, very powerful. The Pokemon this card is attached to gets plus 100 HP. That is insane. That's a lot of HP to have. And of course, with Luxurious Cape also being in the meta, you have some pretty strong tools right now for one-prize Pokemon to give them a lot of HP. Now, there is a reason why I didn't put this card higher on the list, because Lost Vacuum is a pretty big deal. Now, I think Lost Vacuum is a card that will probably still continue to see success in the format. It's a card that I think most decks should try to at least play 1 or 2 of in their decks, mainly because of cards like Hero's Cape existing in the format. But this card is just really good. It's a great card to play within Snorlax. It's a great card to play within the Great Tusk Mill deck. Even decks like Arceus Gudra and Charizard EX of all decks are even playing this card too. It's definitely an interesting card, and as long as Lost Vacuum isn't popular, this card will probably see peaks and valleys of play because of Lost Vacuum being the one thing that holds this card back from truly being a broken card in the format. Because as long as that card's in the format, this card won't really be the best card ever, but it's still going to be a very powerful card, and most archetypes will choose to play it as their A-Spec card over the other A-Spec cards that are in the set. So yeah, we'll have to see where Hero's Cape goes. Again, I wanted to put a bit lower on the list. I think this card is very strong, but I don't think that it's like the best A-Spec, and probably will get held back by how popular Lost Vacuum is, but we'll have to see where this card goes. But definitely looking to be a very promising card, especially for these one-price decks. And at number 7, we got back-to-back A-Specs, baby, and that is going to be the Reboot Pod. I think this card is honestly low-key really, really strong, and one of the better A-Specs within the set. It's a very powerful effect for the future Pokemon. Attach a basic energy card from your discard pile to each of your future Pokemon in play. That is ridiculous. Of course, this card has caused Iron Hands EX to see a ton of play by itself, not even with the future box stuff, just by itself. Now, this is a card that I think will continue to age better as time goes on, due to the fact that I think more people will figure out ways to play this card and make it good, more future decks pop up, and of course, when we get more future cards in the future, get it? Of course, with all the new future cards that'll be coming out within future sets, this card definitely will continue to get better. I think it's just a bit better than Hero's Cape. It's not really a card you can directly counter, because it's not like you can play like a specific card to counter it like you can with Lost Vacuum, but this card is definitely really, really good. And like I said, future is looking pretty promising when we have a strong energy acceleration card like this in the format. This is just gotta be a card that has to see play at some point, and definitely will make its impact within the future archetype. It's just literally a card that if you're going to play a future deck, there's like no reason not to play this card over any other A-Spec due to how strong it is. Considering the other Paradox A-Spec card is kind of mid compared to how good this card is, I think this card definitely takes the cake as one of the best A-Spec cards within the set. And at number 6, we have Cryptaniac's Deciphering. Now, I'm not even sure this card should be this low on the list. It might even be higher, in all honesty, but this card is very strong. It is a reprint of the supporter card Mallow, which was one of the strongest supporters during the Sun and Moon era, allowing you to put 2 cards from your deck in any order you want on top of your deck, and then you can shuffle the other cards back in. So basically, you get to take 2 cards, put them on top of your deck, and as long as you have a way to draw into those cards without shuffling your deck, you can guarantee 2 cards. This card is busted with Bibarel. Bibarel is a great card to pair with Cryptaniac's Deciphering, allowing you to just draw into those 2 cards. If you're looking for a specific piece like a rare candy or something, this card is going to be very helpful to have within your deck. Again, this card honestly could be a bit higher on the ranking. Like, number 6 might be a little too low for this card, but I do think this card is very, very strong. And as long as we have cards like Bibarel in the meta, this card will most likely be a pretty powerful card. I don't think it's like a 4 of. This is not a card you can play like a 4 of like you can Iono in Research, but definitely if you want to play at least 2 in your deck, definitely is a card that will see play for those reasons specifically. I mean, a lot of decks will really like this card. Goldengo, Bibarel, Shenpao, all those decks, like Charizard Bibarel will like this card. Any deck that plays Bibarel will enjoy Cryptaniac, and it's definitely a very strong supporter card, if not one of the best supporter cards within the brand new set. Definitely a card you want to pick up a couple copies of due to how good it is, and that's why I had to put it on the ranking. All right, we are now in the top 5, and we're going to start things off with Iron Leaves EX. Now, this card, in my opinion, is the best EX card in the brand new set, and that's just literally because it knocks out Charizard in one hit. It's also a very splashable card in a lot of decks. The Lost Zone engine can play it. Even the Professor Sada's Vitality decks can play it. Even Arceus V-Star has found a way to squeeze this card within the deck. It's just really good because grass types are kind of mid in my opinion. There isn't really any good grass Pokemon in the format that can just completely body Charizard, but Iron Leaves might be the best way to stop Charizard. Charizard is arguably going to be the BDIF heading into the new format. Bibarel, Charizard, and Pidgeysard are both top tier archetypes and are dominating in Japan. Charizard is just a menace to the format, and having a card like this in the format is going to be really good to have to kind of not keep Charizard in check, but just have, you know, ways for other decks to have a way to deal with Charizard, because Charizard can be very tough to beat if you don't have great ways to KO it in one hit, and Iron Leaves is one of the best ways to do it with its ability Rapid Vernier. Once you're in turn, you can play this Pokemon from your hand on your bench. Then you may switch this Pokemon with your active Pokemon. If you do, you can move any number of energy from your bench Pokemon to this Pokemon. So as long as you have grass energy in play, you can directly move those energies to the Iron Leaves, and then you can attack with Prismatic Edge, which does a clean 180 damage, which of course will knock out Charizard EX in one hit. Like I said, this card has seen a lot of success within the Lost Zone decks because of Mirage Gate. It's seen a lot of play even in Professor Sada decks because you can Sada Grass Energy into play for the Iron Leaves, and it's even seen play with an Arceus Giratina because you can put Grass Energy in play with Trinity for Iron Leaves to then come in and knock out a Charizard EX. A very good card to have in the game in my opinion, and it's really good to have a good Grass type Pokemon that's very splashable in a lot of decks to help counter Charizard, and that's why Iron Leaves cracks the top 5. Coming in number 4 is Eerie. Now, this card is genuinely a very scary card to have within the format. Eerie is a very powerful card that, like I said, kind of scares me that it exists. It allows you to look at your opponent's hand and choose 2 items you find there and discard them. That is a very dirty effect. Being able to get rid of 2 items for free is ridiculous. Not only that, you also get hand knowledge on top of that, so you can see what's in your opponent's hand, which is also pretty broken. But yeah, this card is very strong. One of the best uses it gets is obviously getting rid of cards like Rare Candy. Very, very good when you're playing in Shempow or Charizard, because you can look at their hand and get rid of those rare candies immediately. This card is going to be very strong within Snorlax, which is one of the reasons why I think this card could be very bad for the game, is because Snorlax can ultimately abuse it, because you can use this in Snorlax to get rid of the switches that your opponent is trying to stack in their hand to keep countering the block ability. So yeah, this card is very good. It's also seen some play with an Arceus V-Star. Instead of going Judge, a lot of Arc decks are actually just opting to do Eerie instead to get rid of cards within the hand. I mean, just getting rid of items is good. Not even just getting rid of like rare candy, even getting rid of cards like Superior Energy Retrieval, ball cards, Pokegear, catchers, whatever Pokemon item card exists that you don't want to lose can get rid of with Eerie. Like I said, very powerful supporter card. In fact, it is the best supporter card in the set, in my opinion, just due to the fact that it has such a broken effect that honestly could be pretty bad for the game. We'll have to see where this card goes going forward, but I think this card is definitely going to make an impact within decks like Snorlax, and Arceus V-Star is now starting to play it. Okay, it's now time for the top 3, and coming in number 3, we have Maximum Belt. Now, this card is extremely powerful for decks like Arceus V-Star, and especially really good for Charizard EX. Basically, attacks used by the Pokemon this card is attached to do 50 more damage to your opponent's active Pokemon. That is insane. This basically allows decks like Arceus V-Star and Charizard EX to knock out a basic EX Pokemon before you really get to do the effect of Charizard. So that's kind of the thing. Charizard is a deck that usually like to give up a prize before you start taking big knockouts, but due to having a Maximum Belt, Charizard can now just go Rare Candy Charizard, Maximum Belt, knock out a basic EX Pokemon, which is kind of disgusting. This card is also really good with Arceus, because now Arceus can do the exact same thing. Instead of Arceus failing to knock out a basic EX Pokemon, which is one of the things that does hold Arceus back from being good in our current format, now we have Maximum Belt. All of a sudden, Trinity Nova knocks out a basic X Pokemon, which is disgusting. This card is also good even in the later stages of the game. Like, you can use it with Charizard in the back half of the game to knock out opposing Charizard EX but easier, and even knocking out Pidgeot EX a lot easier too. On top of that, this card is also really good with Giratina V-Star. Now Giratina V-Star can one-shot a Charizard EX with a Maximum Belt on. You can see why this card had to make the top 3. I think it's a very powerful tool card, probably the best tool card in the format, to be honest, just due to how powerful it is and just how aggressive it is going to be within decks like Charizard and Arceus. And yeah, Maximum Belt definitely had to make the top 3 for just how good of an effect this is, and honestly kind of how scary it is to have this card in the format with Charizard and Arceus being able to really abuse this card and take huge tempo turns out of nowhere. And coming in at the number 2 spot, and this is probably where things might get a little quote-unquote controversial, and that's I got Buddy Poffin at number 2. Yes, the number 2 and number 1, in all honesty, you could really swap the 2 between each other if you really wanted to. This is where I kind of struggled the most with the top 10, was what is the best card in the set? Is it Buddy Poffin, or is it the number 1 card in the ranking? But I do think Buddy Poffin is an easy pick for number 2. I think it's always either going to be 2 or 1. This card is really strong, allows you to search your deck for up to 2 basic Pokemon with 70 HP or less and put them onto your bench. This effect is obviously really, really powerful to set up your board. This card is going to be a great replacement for Battle VIP. While it's not as good as Battle VIP because it only gets you Pokemon with 70 HP or less, it's still a very good card in general. There's a lot of setup decks that will really enjoy this. Obviously, it's really good to play within Shempow to get Friggies and Bidoof. It's really good in Charizard to get Pidgeys, Charmanders, and Bidoofs. It's even really good in Lost Box to get you your Comfies. A lot of decks will really love having this card in the game, but not every deck is going to play it, and that's why I couldn't really justify putting it at the number 1 spot. I do think it's one of the most impactful cards within the set, but I think ultimately the number 1 spot is just going to be a better card overall than this card, and this card will kind of be a dead card in the later stages of the game anyways, but in the early game, this card is fantastic. I do think this card definitely could be number 1. Like I said, you can swap number 1 and 2 if you really wanted to, but I do think Buddy Poffin is a clear number 2 spot for this list. A fantastic card to have in the game. It's not as broken and bad as Battle VIP Pass was for the game, but it's still a great card to have, and low HP setup decks will really enjoy having this card around. Now, before we do get to the number 1 spot, I did want to bring up some honorable mentions here, because there were actually a lot of cards that I honestly wanted to put in the top 10, but just couldn't find room. But these cards are all great cases for the number 11 spot, or even could make the top 10 under any other circumstance. The first one is going to be the 1 prize Roaring Moon. This card is very, very powerful and is going to be one of the new best single price decks in the format. Now, while this card is really good, I think a lot of the cards around it are what makes it so good. All the strong ancient cards like Earthen Vessel, Sada, the new Koraidon, another new ancient supporter card, even the new Awakening Drum. So this card definitely could be a case to be on the list, but I think this card is really good because of the cards around it, but still a very strong card. Next up is going to be Iron Crown EX. I didn't want to mention this card. Like I said, this card is very strong for future decks, and kind of like Reboot Pod is going to be a card that will impact for the future due to how many more future cards we might get in new releases. But this card obviously having a very good ability, allowing your future Pokemon to do 20 more damage to your opponent's active Pokemon for each Iron Crown EX you have in play, which allows you to do quite a bit of damage if you stack Iron Crown EX. And then, of course, I want to talk about Mist Energy. Well, Roaring Moon, I think, does get a bit worse with rotation due to losing Battle VIP Pass, and that means it can't, have as an explosive of a turn as it could have. Mist Energy is still a very strong card to have because it's really good against Moon and even Giratina V-Star. A lot of decks might be playing a couple copies of Mist Energy because it allows you to prevent all effects of attacks done to that Pokemon, meaning that you can't be KO'd by Roaring Moon's Frenzy Gouging when this is attached. You also can't be Star Requiemed or even Lost Mind, which is honestly a really strong effect. This card is going to be great, and I think a lot of decks will start incorporating a couple copies of this card in. And then, of course, we got Miraidon here, another really strong card for the future archetype, allowing you to attack with that accelerating peak attack to do 40 damage, and then you can search your deck for up to 2 basic energy cards and attach them to your future Pokemon in any way you like. Great energy acceleration for your Pokemon and just a very strong attack in general. It also, when combined with Iron Crown, can let your Miraidon do quite a bit of early game damage with accelerating peak, doing extra damage with Iron Crown. Great to actually knock out low HP Pokemon like Bidoos, Friggies, and Charmanders. And then, of course, we got to talk about Explorer's Guidance, another supporter card that I think is very, very strong, allowing you to look at the top 6 cards of your deck, put 2 of them in your hand, and then discard the other cards. A card that I think is going to see quite a bit of play in the future box, or ancient box deck, and also just being a very efficient supporter card. It's very similar to Colress, and it does have its uses in decks that want to discard cards really quickly, so I definitely wanted to briefly mention Explorer's Guidance too here in the honorable mentions. Well, now with that out of the way, let's take a look at what I think is the best card within Temporal Forces. And at number 1, I have Prime Catcher, the card that collectively made everybody lose their minds on Twitter when this card got revealed. Now, this card definitely is very, very strong, and like I said, is the best card within Temporal Forces. If you're ever building a deck in this new format, you don't know what A-Spec card to put in your deck, I genuinely think this card is the perfect default card. A lot of decks are just going to flat out have 59 cards and a Prime Catcher. This card is really strong. Basically, Guzma on an item card is ridiculous. Now, thankfully, we did actually see quite a bit of other good A-Spec cards that we even put in this top 10 ranking. So, thankfully, this card isn't completely just overshadowing every other A-Spec card within the set, but it is still a very strong card regardless, and I think a lot of decks are going to play it. And honestly, this card will probably age pretty well as more new sets come out, more new cards come out, more new decks get established, and as the metagame evolves, this card will probably just keep getting better and better. In fact, I think it even rivals Maximum Belt within Charizard, because while Charizard definitely likes having the Maximum Belt in it, Prime Catcher is another A-Spec that will probably see a lot of play within Charizard. I think this card is absolutely bananas. Combine this card too with Radiant Greninja and Canceling Clone within Shempao. It's really good even within the Lost Zone decks, because not only is it a gusting card, it's also a pivot card, which is just ridiculous. This card is absolutely broken, and I think had to be the number 1 spot on this list. While it might not see as much universal praise and play as Buddy Poffin, this card definitely is still going to see a ton of play, and it's going to make a huge impact within the format while it will exist within the game. And honestly, I think as we continue to get even more A-Spec cards, this card will still probably be at the top of the food chain as the best A-Spec card. And in my opinion, Prime Catcher is the best card within Temporal Forces. But yeah, let me know what you thought of the ranking down below. Was it accurate? What did I miss? Because I'm sure there were other cards that could have made the honorable mentions. I did want to briefly mention something like the Raging Bolt in the honorable mentions too, but I definitely did think this list was pretty good, and yeah, let me know what you think of it down below. If you're new to the channel, make sure to subscribe down below to help me on the road to reaching 12,000 subs here on the second channel. Leave a like if you enjoyed, and I'll catch you all later, and yeah, have a good day. Bye-bye.